Good morning, everyone. Subcommittee will come to order. I certainly appreciate everyone's flexibility and good humor as we gather around under these socially distanced circumstances. The COVID pandemic has certainly made for some unique challenges, but it hasn't deterred us from conducting our critical appropriations work on behalf of the American people. So I'm proud to unveil this fiscal 2021 Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development and related agencies appropriations bill. I want to briefly mention some of the bill's highlights, but I want to first thank Ranking Member Mario Diaz-Balart for his collaboration, again, under these unique circumstances, but we've been on the phone a good bit, and we've collaborated as we always do in getting this bill together. He brings a wealth of knowledge to the process as a former chairman of this subcommittee, and it's been, as always, a pleasure working with him and with his staff. I want to thank full committee chairwoman Nita Lowy for her steady leadership and her support. The same goes for our ranking member of the full committee, Kay Granger, and really all the members of this subcommittee. I think we have a great subcommittee. We've had great hearings, good input from all around, and fortunately we've been able to garner ideas from across the full membership of the subcommittee and accommodate most of them. And that goes for member requests in general. By our calculation, we've accommodated more than 90% of member requests, Democratic and Republican. So we hope we can continue to move forward in a bipartisan fashion. I want to recognize our excellent professional staff. Majority Clerk Joe Carlisle has done a terrific job. His expertise is just simply invaluable. He benefits from a great team: Gladys Barcena, Winnie Chang, Joe Eckert, Sarah Puro, Angela Ohm, and Becky Saleh. We're lucky to have Doug Disroot as our minority clerk, along with his colleague, Alyssa Henman. Also want to thank Sean Maxwell from my personal staff, Chris Street from Mr. Diaz's personal office, a very hardworking group. And we thank you for making the best of the circumstances and bringing all this together. This year's THUD bill represents a renewed commitment to improve safety, produce more affordable housing, upgrade our aging and transportation infrastructure, and bolster our nation's resiliency to a changing climate. At the same time, as COVID continues to sweep across our country, we ensure that vulnerable populations, homeless youth, veterans, communities of color, domestic violence survivors, the elderly, people with disability, remain at the forefront of our efforts. The bill includes $75.9 billion in discretionary funding. That's an increase of $1.6 billion over the fiscal 2020 enacted level and $16.7 billion above the President's budget request. We're grateful for a healthy allocation, which, combined with more than $3 billion in offsetting receipts, allows us to make significant progress for our nation's housing and transportation infrastructure. Separately, the bill also includes major increases in contract authority for formula programs that draw resources from the Highway Trust Fund rather than direct appropriations. Those amounts are $14.7 billion for highways, $5.8 billion for transit compared to last year's level. That's consistent with the Invest in America Act, which passed the House as part of H.R. 2 on July 1st. When you total up both discretionary and contract authority resources, you get in the fiscal 21 THUD bill $158.3 billion in combined budgetary resources for transportation, for HUD, and related agencies under our jurisdiction. That's an increase of $22.7 billion compared to the current fiscal year. The departments and programs funded by the THUD bill are integral to our way of life. Housing and transportation connect us to jobs, services, education. Without efficient and equitable transportation networks, our economy cannot thrive. Without affordable housing, our nation's greatest assets, its people, cannot thrive. An appropriations bill, of course, isn't going to create a more just society all by itself, but that ought to be our goal. Our goal should be to take decisive steps in that direction, and I believe that's what this bill does. On the housing side of the ledger, we provide increases of $100 million for CDBG, $350 million increase for home to help spur community revitalization. The home funding alone translates to more than 40,000 additional units of affordable housing and will generate jobs and economic activity across the country. In this bill, we fully renew all housing choice vouchers to keep people stably housed. We provide $250 million for new vouchers targeted to homeless individuals or people at risk of homelessness. We increased the homeless assistance grants by $638 million, or about 23% over last year's level. That's the largest increase in that account in over a decade. The bill also includes an 11% increase for the Public Housing Capital Fund and new set-asides within that fund to address urgent health and safety issues. The bill also does right by transportation. All modes receive robust funding, including highways, transit, rail, aviation, bike and pedestrian projects, and ports. The heavily oversubscribed BUILD program, formerly Tiger, receives $1 billion. That's equal to last year. Amtrak is funded at more than $2 billion. And the popular CRISI program for passenger and freight rail improvements is funded at $500 million. That's an increase of more than 50% over last year, and that is a quite deliberate increase. We provide sufficient resources for FTA's capital investment grants to ensure all projects in the pipeline can move forward, and we provide nearly $500 million for discretionary grants for buses, bus facilities, the low-no emission program to allow transit agencies to recapitalize their aging fleets. We also renew our emphasis on safety activities at FAA, an imperative in light of the 737 MAX disasters, and across DOT by providing targeted funds to boost certification activities, bolster enforcement, and hire skilled personnel. Safety must always remain our top priority at the FAA and across the transportation modes. There are many more highlights, but I'll stop there for now. These investments will improve the quality of life in all communities, urban and rural, while bolstering the economy and laying the groundwork for a more equitable future. However, our nation is in a different circumstance than those surrounding past bills. We're facing an infrastructure crisis exacerbated by the pandemic. That term is not hyperbole. So accordingly, under the leadership of Chairwoman Lowy, we've also included an emergency title in this year's THUD bill that provides an additional $75 billion in major infrastructure investments across housing and transportation programs. Investments that will repair highways and greenways, upgrade aging transit and rail systems, accelerate improvements at our ports and shipyards, build new runways, jumpstart affordable housing production, and further reduce the disgraceful public housing capital backlog. Some may object to the costs or think it's inappropriate to designate this as emergency spending, but I'd just like to ask, what's the cost of inaction, given the circumstances, the challenges we face? Infrastructure Week shouldn't be a punchline. It's almost become that. We got to get serious about this, especially given the circumstances we face. And the fiscal 21 THUD bill is an opportunity to prove that we are serious, that Congress is serious about addressing this issue, particularly as we contemplate the transition from pandemic to full recovery. Every day our constituents see the consequences of inadequate investment in our housing and transportation infrastructure. Natural disasters are increasing in severity and number, exacerbated by accelerating climate change. Meanwhile, COVID-19 is ravaging communities, revealing and deepening existing disparities, while leaving state and local governments with fewer resources and more responsibility to respond in the absence of steady leadership from the White House. This bill does its part to meet these challenges head-on. Again, I want to thank Ranking Member Diaz-Balart, whose partnership and cooperation have been and will continue to be essential as we move this bill forward. I want to thank all colleagues on the subcommittee from both sides of the aisle. We've worked together thus far, and we need to work together going forward. I'm sure we will, to enact this legislation into law. As is customary on this subcommittee, I ask that all members hold any amendments until we meet again at full committee. And I now like to yield to my colleague, our ranking member, Mr. Diaz-Balart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for first for presenting this THUD bill to our subcommittee this morning. I do want to take the opportunity to mention, again, two people that you already have mentioned, and that's this full committee is led by, frankly, two of the most honorable, formidable, distinguished members of the House. Chairwoman Lowy, who has spent a lifetime serving our country and who will be severely missed when she is no longer in Congress. And again, Kay Granger from the great state of Texas, a titanium Texan who will be back and who has been an amazing friend and leader, and again, cannot thank you for your leadership and your friendship enough. Mr. Chairman, you have crafted a bill. By the way, and obviously you mentioned staff, Mr. Chairman, and none of us could do our job without our personal staff and the committee staff, and this committee has amazing staff, and we're indebted to them. You've crafted a bill, Mr. Chairman, that thoughtfully addresses many of the transportation and housing needs of our nation. You have once again gone out of your way to include the vast majority of requests from members of the committee, regardless of Republicans or Democrats. And once again, you've included policies, programs, and oversight measures that I'm convinced will improve the way that agencies in this bill serve our constituents. And that's what it's all about. I would like to especially thank you for including the $300 million for ports infrastructure grants, which is not just important for coastal states, California and Florida, but also to our nation's entire freight network. The bill also includes $389 million for the Maritime Academy Training Ship Program, which will fund a training ship in Texas. By fully funding this ship, I want all of you to know that the chairman chose the right policy for our maritime academies to bring this new training vessel into service without delay. And he's had to make some tough decisions to get that done. I'm pleased that the bill continues investments in our nation's highways, rail, transit, and airport infrastructure. You mentioned that yourself. These programs will build on progress that has been made in recent years through this bill, creating jobs and obviously spurring innovation. The bill includes funding to renew housing assistance to all households currently served. Those of us who have worked on this bill over the years understand that this is a serious commitment, a commitment that is not always easy to meet. This year, these programs required about $2 billion additional funding just to keep pace with inflation, $2 billion. But it's our duty to meet these commitments, especially for our elderly, the disabled, and our veterans, our heroes. I also applaud the chairman for including initiatives to address homelessness in America, including families at risk of becoming homeless. And we know the situation that so many are facing right now, victims of domestic violence and veterans. Again, the chairman has done, I think, a tremendous job. And not only has he done a tremendous job, he mentioned at the beginning that we have been in touch. He has been accessible, he has been open, and Mr. Chairman, for that, again, and for the friendship and the trust, I am grateful. I am grateful for the friendship that we've developed over the years and the trust that we've developed over the years. So while now here comes the but. While I strongly support most components of the base bill, again, it's a good bill that the chairman has put together, a responsible bill, a thoughtful bill. There are parts of the bill that make it difficult for me to support it at this time. The bill includes, as the chairman mentioned, $75 billion in emergency infrastructure spending. This is nearly equal to all of the discretionary funding in the base bill. So basically, it's doubling the size of the entire bill. This spending is outside of last year's bipartisan budget agreement and puts our entire, I think, appropriations, the regular appropriations process at risk. The top-line allocation for the base bill is also based on a gimmick. So if it wasn't bad enough that we're doubling the size of the bill, with frankly very little discussion, if any, it's based on a gimmick, and let me explain to you why. The majority chose to take a portion of the Millicon VA bill off budget, just take it off budget, to make room for more spending in other bills. Finally, the bill includes some controversial DOT and HUD policy riders. Now, these were dropped last year, consistent with the budget agreement. I think they should be dropped again, obviously, so that we don't get stuck in unnecessary political disputes, putting this great bill, this thoughtful bill, except for these issues that I mentioned, in jeopardy. Again, in spite of these concerns, I want to thank the chairman. I'm truly impressed as to the mark that you have put forward. There's so many aspects of this bill that are just frankly really, really important and very positive. And here's the good news. totally confident that we'll be able to work through our differences and reach an agreement on this bill as we move through the process. That's what the process is all about. So finally, again, Mr. Price, I want to thank you for the collaborative approach and for your friendship and for your trust. I'm lucky to be able to work with the chairman and with this chairman, and I look forward to the hard, difficult work ahead in front of us. And again, we don't have a lot of time, so that we can complete this bill and make sure that we get it to the president's desk by September 30th. I'm confident that we will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your kind words and your cooperative approach as always. Now turn to the full committee chairman, Ms. Lowy. We've had a series of love fests for Ms. Lowy here over these 3 days as successive subcommittees have marked up. I won't add to that except to say that we do value her leadership very, very greatly, and especially in these tough times, we value it, and we, of course, are very much aware of her pending retirement, but we're not done yet. We certainly are not done yet, and I'm sure she'll have some important words to say about our bill, and so I'm happy to yield to her.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've been friends, colleagues for a very long time, but I'll save some remarks for another day. But it's been a pleasure for me to work with you and all of my colleagues, and I thank you for your kind words. Well, thank you, Chairman Price and Ranking Member Diaz-Balart, for your work on this bill. I also thank the incredible staff for their efforts. In an unprecedented year of challenges, the fiscal year 2021 Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Bill focuses on improving access to housing, protecting the traveling public, revitalizing our infrastructure, and investing in our community's economic health to help end intergenerational poverty. This bill would fund safety upgrades on our roads and rails, as well as research to improve safety technologies. It would also provide significant funding for the Gateway Project, one of the most important transportation projects in our country that will advance commuter safety for millions and the economy for the entire nation. Housing is the foundation to every aspect of our lives. Yet access to affordable, decent housing was already out of reach for millions before COVID-19 compounded this reality. This bill includes $3.5 billion for community development block grants, which the President's budget request sought to eliminate. It also provides increases to tenant-based rental assistance and homeless assistance grants, while blocking the Trump administration's cruel policies that target mixed immigration status families and transgender members of our communities. I urge support of this bill that would make vast improvements to our nation's infrastructure and in the day-to-day lives of our constituents. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Now I'll yield to the ranking member of our full committee, our friend Kay Granger.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman Price, for presenting the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Bill today. I'd also like to thank my friend Mario Diaz-Balart, the ranking member of this subcommittee. The programs funded in this bill reach into all of our communities, creating more economic opportunity and improving the quality of life for the American people. This bill continues key transportation infrastructure and safety programs, including highway transit and port funding, very important to our economy. The funding provided for airport infrastructure and air traffic modernization will be critical for the aviation industry as it recovers from the coronavirus pandemic. I thank Chairman Price for working with Ranking Member Diaz-Balart to include many of the priorities of members on our side of the aisle. Unfortunately, there are some provisions in this bill that will prevent me from supporting it. This bill is not consistent with the two-year budget deal that was signed into law last August. The bill includes an additional $1.6 billion over fiscal year 2020 because a portion of the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs bill has been declared an emergency simply to make room for more spending in this and other bills. The budget agreement last summer was built on an understanding that there would not be controversial policy riders. This bill violates the spirit of that agreement. Language is included that prevents the Department of Transportation from reallocating funds from the failed California high-speed rail project, as well as language that would strip regulatory authorities from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Finally, this bill includes $75 billion in new emergency spending, including components of the infrastructure bill that was pushed through the House last week without Republican involvement. I didn't support that bill because it was a departure from years of bipartisan work on transportation and infrastructure priorities, and I cannot support this additional spending until there's a serious discussion with members on our side of the aisle. The best way to advance housing and transportation opportunities for all of our constituents and get funds distributed in a timely manner is to work together. The programs in this bill are too important to be delayed by partisan politics. I hope we can address these problems as this bill moves through the appropriation process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Any other members who have a statement? Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just briefly want to thank you and the ranking member and, of course, our chairwoman for this investment when we need it the most. And just two highlights out of a really great bill. And, of course, I want to thank the staff. But the funding for homelessness with an emphasis on domestic violence survivors is literally going to be a lifeline for them. And back at home in Massachusetts, we appreciate the funding for the 13A vouchers that is going to protect so many of our elders from being evicted during this crisis. So again, thank you for a great bill.
Thank you. Any other statements? Do we have any amendments that members wish to offer? If not, I'll recognize Mr. Quigley for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again to all involved for your great work on this bill. I move that the bill be favorably reported to the full committee.
You've heard the gentleman's motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All in favor, all opposed, no.
No.
Depending on the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be allowed to make technical and conforming changes to the bill and report. Without objection, so ordered. Seeing no further business, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, good. Norma, you've said nothing.